The Silk Road was a network of markets and trading posts throughout Asia and the Indian Ocean Basin that extended from the eastern Mediterranean to the interior of China. And it earned its name thanks to the most valued commodity on the route, silk. But only slightly less valued was the opportunities for intimacy the road presented. From cat houses to how-to manuals and everything in between, the Silk Road had a little something for everyone. So, today we're going to take a look at what intimacy was like for nomads traveling the Silk Road. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what famous trade routes you would like to hear about. Okay, so let's take a look at the long and winding Silk Road. Silk had been exchanged for centuries, but the Han Dynasty in China only officially opened its trade in silk to the west in 130 BC. Contact between the Romans and the Han, and all groups in between, allowed for cultural and commercial exchange on an unprecedented scale. The Silk Road was used for over 1,500 years, with varying degrees of popularity, reaching its height under the Mongols during the 13th and 14th centuries. The merchants, diplomats, travelers, and missionaries who traveled along the Silk Road rarely traversed the whole route, but rather participated in a relay system. Mostly men, these individuals naturally sought female and sometimes male companionship on the road. But over the extensive landmass and lengthy time period that the Silk Road was used, ideas about copulation, sexuality, and gender varied. This wasn't always a bad thing, because there was a lot of influence and exchange that affected such practices and principles for the better. On the other hand, the road also had a dark side and is deeply connected with slavery and human trafficking. Marco Polo was a Venetian merchant, explorer, and everyone's go-to summer pool game. But Polo traveled the Silk Road between 1271 and 1295. And according to his writings, the hospitality one could expect when staying at the house of a stranger really went above and beyond. We mean way above and beyond. Marco asserts that a host was often willing to let a visitor sleep with his wife. Polo wrote that when a traveler arrived, the host is delighted and desires his wife to put herself entirely at the guest's disposal, while he himself gets out of the way, and comes back no more until the stranger shall have taken his departure. Polo claimed that the guest was welcome to enjoy the wife's society as long as he wished. The husband, for his part, not only would take no shame in the matter, but allegedly considered it an honor. He writes, "All the men of this province are made wittles by their wives in this way. The women themselves are fair and wanton." Marco Polo also mentioned that the Mongols were not particularly thrilled about this activity, but they left the men to their shame and their naughty custom. Roman attitudes about slaves, harlots, and concubines were not always clear, and intimate relationships between male owners and female slaves were, unfortunately, all too common. In the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, women sold themselves into sex work to survive, and despite the modest Byzantine disposition, copulation was the preoccupation of many. With the importance of silk in the Byzantine Empire, the Silk Road was traversed by Byzantine traders who had extensive contact with other merchants. Cat houses were also present throughout the empire, which was the western terminus of the road. During the early days of the Silk Road, Roman influences were heavy, particularly on the western end. As a result, Roman ideas about same-sex relationships were extended along some of its length. The history of male companionship in the Mediterranean is long and storied, but some historians find that the Mongols engaged in homosexuality in China, as well as in the Russian Khanates. In fact, there are accounts of Genghis Khan himself, whose given name was Temujin, sleeping under blankets with other men. But this does not mean they were engaging in an intimate relationship. But who knows? The Khan gets what the Khan wants. On the other hand, the Mongol world was also subject to a heavy strain of Islamic influence. Islamic culture perceived homosexuality as an improper subject in polite society. But despite whatever the prevailing view may have been, it seems to have been going on in private lives. Very few men would probably be excited to become a eunuch, but historically speaking, the designation definitely had its advantages. Eunuchs were commonly used as diplomats and court officials by the late Roman and Byzantine empires. as well as by Chinese dynastic leaders. After castration, a eunuch could be a hot commodity for a merchant within both empires. Why were eunuchs so valuable? Well, many perceived them as neutral and harmless. Therefore, eunuchs often received privilege and prominence in social and political settings. And it wasn't just the Roman end of the Silk Road that felt this way. In China, eunuchs were similarly deemed unthreatening and found their way into the closest and highest imperial circles. Zheng He, a renowned Chinese explorer, was a eunuch, and according to historians, he used his contact and influence to extend Chinese dynastic influence all along the Silk Road. The legacy of Genghis Khan and his genetic code is nothing short of astounding. Mathematically speaking, he is said to have over 16 million descendants, which makes sense given that at the time he was alive, he viewed women as objects of plunder. Genghis Khan and his carnal activities highlight copulation as a way of demonstrating power, as well as leaving one's mark. Marco Polo also mentioned the practice of the Khan taking any beautiful woman for himself. Tribes within the Yuan dynasty of Kublai Khan, Genghis' son, also sent women to the Khan. To put it mildly, Mongol leaders did not want partners. According to Marco Polo, every year 100 of the most beautiful maidens of the tribe were sent to the Great Khan, who would commit them to the charge of certain elderly ladies who lived in his palace. Then, those who were deemed attractive enough were appointed to attend on the emperor by turns. Polo claims the women were sent in groups of 6, and their shift would last for 3 days and 3 nights. They were to wait on him when he is in his chamber and when he is in his bed, to serve him in any way, and to be entirely at his orders. When the 3 days and 3 nights were up, the 6 women would be relieved by 6 others. This kept out throughout the year. The Silk Road was a revolutionary historic development that helped spread culture and goods throughout Europe and Asia. But it had a dark side as well. For one, it served as a conduit for moving women around Asia, both by force and diplomacy. Take, for example, the story of Wenji, who highlights the role of women along the Silk Road. In the 2nd century, Wenji was captured and transported along the road. She was then forced to marry a nomad warlord before being rescued. Wenji had 2 children by the man, and after her rescue, she mourned the loss of her nomad family. A song, believed by some to be her own words, says, "For each step is a step away from them. My soul is overwhelmed. As their figures vanish in the distance, only my love remains." I guess she had mixed feelings about her rescue. In the 7th century, a woman named Wen Cheng fared a bit better when she was escorted from China to Tibet as the bride-to-be for a Tibetan ruler. The event was celebrated in China and Tibet. In modern times, hotels tend to offer things like pools, turn-down service, and a beverage machine in the hall. But in ancient times, they may have offered a lot more. Historical evidence shows that Turfan, an area in China through which merchants passed, entered into contracts with locals and officials for services like interpretation and travel passes. Official documents from Turfan reveal that women were at the market as well, and may have been offered to men staying along the road as part of a contractual agreement. The practice wasn't some innocent cultural quirk. It was literal slavery. Merchants could actually buy female slaves, and the contracts they used spelled out the grisly details of the owner's rights. According to scholars, these contracts stated that the new owner can beat his slave, maltreat her, tie her up, sell her, hold her hostage, give her as a gift, or do whatever he likes with her. Copulation isn't specifically mentioned, but it is mentioned that the buyer can do whatever he wants with her. The Kama Sutra was written, or at least compiled, in the 3rd or 4th century, and is considered a manual for intimate sexual relations by modern readers. In its origin, it emphasized intimate relationships as social and economic duties and offered positions, illustrations, and guidance about lovemaking. Now, it wasn't all about social and economic duty. After all, kama means pleasure, so that was definitely always part of the plan, too. Hinduism never made its way too far outside of India, but it was one of the faiths exchanged along the road. And Hinduism wasn't the only religion to influence intimacy practices along the Silk Road. Tantric Buddhism, a variation of Buddhism that emphasizes the path to enlightenment through achieving ecstasy, is based on the idea that a person embraces the divine. As Tantric Buddhism spread along the Silk Road, out of Tibet, where it was based, and into China and India, its tenets influenced carnal attitudes and practices. In ancient China, sexual intimacy was seen as natural and beneficial, but it was also believed to have a therapeutic, medicinal value. Ancient medical texts include descriptions of proper and improper intercourse, practices that continued during the ebbs and flows of the period within which the Silk Road was used. The Tang Dynasty Manual, known as the Sunu Jing, or the Classic of the White Madam, offers advice to men about lovemaking. It also stresses the importance of the act for health and nature, when addressing the question of what will happen if one abstains from intimacy. The book states such a thing is absolutely out of the question. Yin and yang have their alterations, as does everything in nature. Human beings should follow the rhythms of yin and yang, just as they follow the rhythms of the season. That's a nice way to think about it. So what do you think? What surprised you about the Silk Road? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.